The Penguins cruised to a big and historic win on Long Island on Wednesday night. Hunter and I are going to chronicle that and more on this edition of the Locked On Penguins podcast.
You're Locked On Penguins, your daily podcast on the Pittsburgh Penguins, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Welcome back, Penguins fans, to another edition of the Locked On Penguins podcast. I have returned from my Christmas break. I am one of your co-hosts, Patrick Damp. You can follow me on Twitter at synonym for wet, joined as always by the illustrious, the one and only Hunter Hodies. You can follow him on Twitter at Hunter Hodies. You can follow the show's Twitter at LO_Penguins. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts, as well as YouTube. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 moneyline bet. That's $150 if your team wins. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. And Hunter, I don't know. I got to check my watch here. I think the Penguins just kept scoring. Speaking of getting started, in the second period last night against the New York Islanders, they cruised to a 7-0 win. And according to the preeminent Penguins historian, Bob Grove, that is their largest margin of victory against the New York Islanders in a road game in the history of the franchise. 7-0, a shutout on Long Island. And I don't know where to start. I'm not sure where to start on this one because I texted it to you last night. First period, it looked like a typical game out of the holiday break. Neither team had their legs. You know, you said it to me in a text. Of all the first periods that have ever happened in the history of hockey, that was certainly one of them. And then in the second period, the Penguins wake up and they dominate the Islanders. I mean, this was not even close. It was just an absolute ass kicking from the second period until the final buzzer. And I think a good place to start is because I know that I am critical of officiating in the National Hockey League quite often because it is not great. But if we are going to criticize them when they screw up, we have to give them their flowers when they do well, because Rickard Rakell's goal that kicked it all off was a goal, and they went in and reviewed it and reversed it and made the correct call.
It almost looked like a classic intent to blow call, right? And I'm sure if Colton Sissons was watching that, he was probably going to get triggered by it, to say the least. I would have been pretty upset had they taken that goal away because there was no chance that puck was frozen underneath Ilya Sorokin. And once Rakell got things going in the second period, the Penguins just kept blitzing and blitzing and blitzing this team. The Penguins have been, I would say, bullied by the Islanders these last 4 to 5 to 6 years. It was nice to give them a taste of their own medicine for once in this game. And
I mean, and the biggest thing for last night is looking back to last season against the Islanders.
Right.
We talked about it with the Hurricanes on this show that coin flip games against the Islanders the Hurricanes never seem to go the Penguins' way. Last year, they had some weird block against the Islanders where whether it was, one goofy play or just like a few minute lapse in play, they couldn't find a way to beat the Islanders last year, no matter how hard they tried. And then this year, this game was just the complete opposite.
Outside of one blowout loss against the Islanders last year, all 3 other games were fairly close. The other game on Long Island, the Penguins were up by 2 goals twice in that game before the Islanders came back to win it. And then both games in Pittsburgh, the Penguins had leads heading into the third period, and they blew both of those games. So honestly, you could have made an argument that the Penguins could have beaten that team 3 out of 4 times last year. They just couldn't hold on to a lead to save their lives in those games against the Islanders. But in this one, they torched Ilya Sorokin throughout the second period. The Islanders just had no answer for what the Penguins were doing. This was not the Islanders that I feel like I've watched for the past 4 to 5 to 6 years that are usually very good defensively. This year, they're not nearly as good defensively as they normally were. It's funny. you usually know them as that team that plays a bunch of 1-0 games, 2-1 games, especially under Barry Trotz, right? Well, they're not doing that this year under Liam Lambert. They did it a little bit more last year under Lambert, but this year it's their offense that's really been kicked into high gear, and their defense, it's been there, but it's also not been as good because Pelech and Pulock are hurt right now, and Scott Mayfield. Those are 3 of their 6 best defensemen on the team. So that obviously hurts, but the Islanders just could not stop the Penguins at all. Once they got humming, it was lights out. And I know Wayne Lambert tried to call timeout in the second period. Yeah, that did you basically no good because the Penguins just came right back and kept blitzing Ilya Sorokin. And I'll say that, for as good as Sorokin is, and he has killed the Penguins numerous times ever since he came into the league, it was nice lighting him up like a Christmas tree for once.
It was. And one thing we have to talk about here, because we've talked about it on this show plenty of times, is one of the most frustrating things about this Penguins squad so far this season is that when they play smart, responsible hockey, they once again look like a playoff team and a possible contender. They played smart, responsible hockey last night. They didn't suddenly turn into the 2016 Penguins again, where they just blitzed you all the time with speed, skill, and overwhelmed you with all 4 lines. No. They didn't do that. They were positionally sound. They were good on the breakout. They were smart on the forecheck. They were smart with their pinches, and they took what the game gave them. And because they are a better team than the New York Islanders, I feel very confident in saying this, that the Pittsburgh Penguins on paper are much better than the New York Islanders this year. They were able to use that to their advantage. And it came in the form of a 7-0 win, because I read our good pal Josh Yohe's 10 observations in The Athletic this morning. And he brought up the point that sometimes wins like this for this roster turn into them regressing back to their former form. I think a game like this is kind of the opposite of that, because this wasn't a 3-0, 4-1, 5-2 kind of win. This was a dominant 7-0 win. And that should tell them, hey, if we play this kind of hockey more often, we're going to get wins like this more often. And I believe Crosby, Malkin, Letang, and Carlson and everybody else when they say our biggest goal is to win, not individual awards. So I got to take them at their word.
And we've said this, I feel like, a lot on the show this year. The offense will still come even when the Penguins are playing stout in their own zone. And they were playing great in their own zone. They only allowed 9 high danger chances at 5-on-5 throughout this game. Only 2 in the second period where the Penguins were just blitzing the Islanders. That's rock solid stuff. If you want to go to expected goals against, the Islanders only had 1.58 expected goals for in this game. The 1.58 expected goals against for the Penguins. That's beautiful. I mean, that's lockdown, textbook defensive coverage in your own zone. I said that on the preview with Gil when you weren't there. When the Penguins want to play like this, they can. And they've done this throughout the season in wins. I just want to see this more on a consistent basis, because I know Mike Sullivan likes when they play like this. I know that, you know, he also probably likes when they can revert back to 2016 form, but I also know that they don't have that type of roster right now to play like they did in 2016. You have to dial it back a little bit, and we've seen them do that in countless games this season. Now that you can add this one to the long list of examples where, hey, you don't need to just be running gun and trying to turn games into track meets like you were against the Maple Leafs, for example. That's the only regulation loss in their last 7 games. You don't need to play like that to find success. You can win in other ways while still generating quite a bit of offense, which is what the Penguins did in this game.
And at first, and we're going to let it slide this episode just because it was such a huge win last night against a team that's tortured them for the last little while. But they did all this at 5-on-5. There was we were ready to come on here today and roast the power play last night after the first game. We were very ready to start talking about it again, but the Penguins decided to flip the script. So if you put together this kind of effort at 5-on-5 and then you start getting help again from your power play, we are talking about a team, like you said, their last regulation loss was that butt whooping by the Maple Leafs. They're starting to stack points. They're starting to put some streaks together. Now, we're going to talk about that later in the show.
5-1-1 in their last 7, Pat. Like, that's sometimes slow is the name of the game, as people say. This is where you start building that kind of long winning streak or just long streak of winning play, I should say. I mean, you don't need to go on a, I don't know, 12 or 13 game winning streak, but if you can, win 7 out of 9, 8 out of 10, stretch that to 11 out of 14 or something like that, you can have a loss in there somewhere, because I don't think you're going to win 12 or 13 in a row. You're still playing overall winning hockey. And if you can win the 2 games this weekend, funny enough, the Penguins will go into 2024 7-1-1 in their last 9 games. Now, I know they haven't made a major move in the standings as of yet, just because the Metro is still very tight right now, and there's still quite a few teams in the division who are at least playing well. But this is what I've wanted to see from this team all year. More consistency. It's 5 out of 7. And those are 2 big points in regulation against a team you're chasing. You do that again on Sunday, it's going to get interesting heading into the new year.
And we'll have previews tomorrow for this back-to-back weekend coming up. But before we get into any of that, we got to talk about what a historic, incredible win this was last night. Letang is going to take home the headlines, but there was so much more that happened in that game last night, in that 7-0 win over the New York Islanders, and we are going to get to that right after this. But first, we have to tell you about one of today's sponsors, and that is Sleeper. We've almost reached the halfway point of the NHL season, Penguins fans, and like we just said, some highs, some lows. Penguins are who they are right now. We're going to find out who they are here in the stretch run. But regardless of where the Penguins stand in the current standings, I want to remind you that you could win big by playing daily fantasy hockey on Sleeper, the official daily fantasy app of the Locked On NHL Network. Sleeper is our #1 choice for daily fantasy sports, and especially daily fantasy hockey, because with Sleeper, you can win 100 times your cash in daily fantasy hockey contests. Now, at this point, you know who I'd be taking to win 100 times my money? Christopher Letang, baby, because that was an incredible performance last night. Historic, record-setting, all the ways you can describe it. And I love doing this on Sleeper because I'm not a big season-long fantasy guy. Anybody who's played with me will tell you I flame out every year. So I love the day-to-day aspect of it. I can play with my friends on daily fantasy, from NFL to NBA to MLB, college football, you name it. And entries can be made in just under 1 minute. You don't have to agonize over setting your lineup each and every day. And all you have to do is pick whether studs like Crosby, Letang, McDavid, Ovechkin, Bedard, McKinnon, or so many more will record more or less than their sleeper projections for things like goals, assists, saves, plus minus, and more in any given game. To win 100 times bet on Sleeper, you need to correctly predict the outcome of 8 player stats. You heard me, Penguins fans. You can win up to 100 times your money playing daily fantasy hockey with Sleeper. So start paying attention and nail your picks so you can start winning big. Use promo code LOCKEDONNHL and you'll get up to a $100 match on your first deposit. Terms and conditions apply. That's code LOCKEDONNHL. See Sleeper's terms of use for details and locational availability. We have returned for the second segment of the Locked On Penguins podcast. I have returned to the show. I am one of your co-hosts, Patrick Damp, joined as always by the illustrious Hunter Hodies. And we got to chronicle Kris Letang's big night last night, man, because he becomes the first defenseman in the 100+ year history of the National Hockey League to record 6 or 5 assists in one period. Incredible.
I just can't believe that hadn't happened before this, to be honest. You're telling me that, because when I saw that stat, I was like, Nick Lidstrom didn't do this, Paul Coffey didn't do this. We can keep going down the list of legendary defensemen who
Bobby Orr.
Yeah.
I
was stunned.
And not just the fact that, you know, there have been, and this is no slight on Kris Letang, there have been so many legendary offensive defensemen in this league, and so many of them played in an era where scoring was through the roof.
Right. No, I agree with you. And the fact that he did it in today's age, and even though scoring is not what it was back then, it's still quite an accomplishment to do that, especially in one freaking period where the Penguins were just going berserk on Ilya Sorokin. And this again shows how good of a player Kris Letang continues to be. Coming into this game, he really hadn't, I feel like, done as much offensively compared to normal, just because Erik Karlsson was kind of that guy, right, doing the offense from the blue line. But Letang was still getting at least his share. But this game was his one to shine. Letang before this was playing excellent on the penalty kill, playing really well in his own zone at 5-on-5. But he finally got to show everyone again, hey, yeah, I still exist, and I am still one heck of an offensive threat from the blue line. His pass to set up Evgeni Malkin's goal from in front of the net, I had shades of San Jose in 2016 where he was going for a skate in San Jose's zone. That was vintage Letang. And then he had a much better pass to Valtteri Puustinen for his first NHL goal, and that was a mammoth of a shot, by the way.
And that came in the third period, but and we'll talk about that here in a sec. And I'm sorry to cut you off, but
just two beautiful plays by Letang there on a night where he was absolutely flawless. I mean, the fact that he has so many detractors out there just makes my blood boil, to be honest. And yeah, I hope everyone chronicled this as well, and I hope Pens Chronicles from Twitter absolutely enjoyed this. That's for sure.
I didn't know if we were going to name them directly, but that's funny. But the other thing I wanted to say about that is we kind of talked about this in at the end of the first segment. They did all that. He did all this at 5-on-5. There was no power play time involved. This was all even strength. And, you know, again, we can always complain about the power play. It's easy content, but regardless of how you feel about the power play, the majority of the games played at 5-on-5, and Kris Letang did all this at even strength. And you brought up another thing that happened last night there real quick. Valtteri Puustinen, man, unbelievable goal. That is a goal scorer's goal.
Yes.
And yes, I know 7-0, the Islander, that, you know, similar to our pals on the North Shore with the Pittsburgh Steelers, what they did to the Bengals right before Christmas, where they broke their will. The Penguins broke the Islanders' will last night. By the third period, the Islanders quit. They were done. They just wanted to get the hell out of the building. And I get that when Valtteri Puustinen's goal makes it 7-0. But I have been saying this about Puustinen for the last couple of weeks. That is a goal scorer's goal because he makes the right read. He gets to a soft area. He opens up and gets every piece of a one-timer. And Hunter's about to take me to school because he put his glasses on, but unbelievable goal from him. And I said it to our pal Jesse Marshall. He's got to stick in the National Hockey League. I even into what I agree with what Jesse said.
Give him a run. I mean, seriously, just give him at least a small run to see what he can do. If he pans out like some of the other Wilkes-Barre call-ups this year, Pat, okay, so be it. You can send him back down. No harm, no foul. But with what he has shown so far this season, it's been better than anyone that's come up from Wilkes-Barre, including Zohorna, who provided that spark early on. And then, of course, Big Z finally scored last night, the first thing he's done in quite a few weeks, it feels like at this point. But if he can continue to provide this value, he should be on the team at least for the next few weeks, if not potentially the rest of the season. Because when Brian Rust is ready to come back, and it looks like that's going to be maybe sooner rather than later. He had a major workout before practice on Thursday morning. That's great news for him, considering how banged up he's been lately. The Penguins are all of a sudden going to have quite a few options with him. Got Raquel, back-to-back goals for him now. And with Puustinen producing at this rate, top 9 is all of a sudden looking pretty fun to say the least. And your right winger depth all of a sudden looking like a strength when just a few weeks ago it looked like a major weakness to say the least. But I could not be more thrilled for him. I just didn't know if he was ever going to, I guess, come up from Wilkes-Barre and show what he can do. But I'm glad that he has, because he's been a very pleasant surprise since coming up. I definitely think he's got to stick. And the funny thing is, he scored that goal. He wasn't even on Evgeni Malkin's wing to start that game last night. They demoted him after the Ottawa game to the third line, and he still goes out there and gets his first NHL goal, on that beautiful slap shot. I mean,
yeah,
he has it right now, people. He really does.
Those are two things that show you he might be different than a lot of the other call-ups. One, reacted very well to a demotion. As a 24-year-old kid who is a prospect that's been up and down, you get demoted in the lineup. That's tough. How you react says a lot about you. And I've been saying it for the last few weeks. He does not look out of place in the top 6. He is playing very well. He's not deferring to the big guys. He's not just happy to be there. He's very good on the forecheck. He has really good vision. And as we saw last night, he knows where to go. So I agree. This is a very positive sign for this team as we get into 2024 and this team continues to build towards the push to the playoffs. Lastly, but certainly not leastly, Tristan Jarry back on top of the shutout leaders in the National Hockey League. I'm going to kickstart it, and then you can take the ball here real quick before we finish up this segment. But I don't know that the Tristan Jarry for Vezina candidacy is real, but I do know that he has to, at the very least, be in the conversation strictly because of shutouts, strictly because he is putting together a solid campaign on a team that without him right now might be a lot worse off.
I agree. And it was awesome seeing him do this on Long Island. And right after he had some Jarry chance, because of course Islanders fans are going to give it to him after what happened in 2021. You saw some weird takes out there on social media from Islanders fans saying, oh yeah, can't wait to chant his name after he gives up 5 again, or, see you later, Jar Jar Binks, I guess is what they're calling him. This isn't Attack of the Clones or the Phantom Menace here, people. This isn't 2021 Tristan Jarry anymore. This is 2023 Tristan Jarry, and he is playing like one of the best goaltenders in hockey. His numbers right now, he has 10 goals saved above expected. That's 8th in the NHL. He also has a .916 save percentage and a 2.49 goals against average. He is playing like one of the best goaltenders in the league. And outside of a few rough starts to start the year, he has been just fantastic this season. And now we get to see what he can do after January 1st, right? That's where I really want to see if he can stay healthy, if he can continue this pace. The fact that he played like this, and I know the Islanders didn't even put up 25 shots, but a shutout is a shutout, people. And he also did this. He hadn't played in a week and a half. Nedeljkovic was starting to take away some starts from him, right? And sometimes that can lead to a goalie maybe feeling a little less confident, feeling a little rusty in net. Jarry didn't feel any of those two things in this game. He looked confident. He looked poised. He was aggressive, challenged Islanders shooters, including Brock Nelson, who has killed him on multiple occasions.
Oh, yeah.
He was fantastic in this game. And I think he showed everyone why he is the 1A goalie on this team right now.
Can't disagree with anything you just said there. And while it may be December 28th and not Groundhog Day, we are going to come back and have a discussion we have seemingly had once a week, every week throughout this season.
One more thing on Kris Letang, just one more thing. He had the highest game score last night of 10. That's the highest game score since Dom started tracking that in 2017. Right. And he also, his 6 assists came in a span of 1933. No other player in the league's history has had 6 assists in a span of less than 30 minutes in one game. Congratulations, Kris. Just a record-setting night for, I'll say it right here, the greatest defenseman in franchise history. Not even close, people. It's not close.
Again, can't disagree. So we're going to have our groundhog discussion when we come back that we've seemingly had to have every other week, and that is, has this team turned a corner? But first, we're going to tell you about our next sponsor, which is FanDuel. As the weather gets colder, the NFL offers stay hot on FanDuel. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 moneyline bet. That's $150 if your team wins. If you've been thinking about joining FanDuel, there's no better time than now to get in on the action. The app is so easy to use, and there is a wide range of betting options, including spreads, player props, over-unders, and more. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and kick off this NFL season. FanDuel, official partner of the National Football League. We're back here for one more segment on this Thursday edition of the Locked On Penguins podcast. Welcome back, Penguins fans. I am Patrick Damp, joined as always by the one and only Hunter Hodies. And oh boy, man, like I said, still December, but feels like February, feels like Groundhog Day because we got to have the talk again. Has this Penguins team reached a turning point after last night's big win against the Islanders?
They're certainly on their way. And it feels this type of win. I mean, I know we said this a few weeks ago after Tristan Jarry's goalie goal in Tampa, right? Is this the start of something good cooking? And you saw some more middling results, so the answer was no. But after this one, after you beat a team that has had your number for the past 4 to 5 years, This one potentially feels a little bit different. And it's also just a continuation of how they've been playing throughout the last 7 games. Honestly, ever since Kyle Dubas challenged them during his press conference just a few weeks ago when he said he was really going to evaluate this team at the All-Star break. Since then, 5-1-1, your only regulation loss, as we said, it was that blowout loss in Toronto when Kyle Dubas made his return. Other than that, you have points in 6 of your last 7 games. I know you haven't made that big of a move in the standings, but that could come if you're able to get a couple more results at home this upcoming weekend against the Blues and the Islanders. Pat and I will preview those 2 games on the Friday edition of the show. But if you can go into the new year 7-1-1 in your last 9, you're definitely cooking with some gas at that point. And then, after that, you have some more tough games coming up, especially Boston at the Garden next Thursday. That's going to be quite a bit of fun. I had to say it, of course. Had to put that out there. But
playing the Bruins at the Garden, kid.
At the Garden, of course. But I can only hope, I feel like, that it's slow, but we're starting to see what this team can do when it plays at a high level. We still need to see it more consistently, but I'm getting hopeful still. That's for sure.
I think I want to go back to what you said about how we had this discussion after the Jari goal game against the Lightning.
Mm-hmm.
I think and this is me fully admitting this, especially on my part, I think we got caught up in the shiny toy of the goalie goal and kind of losing the forest through the trees, because in the lead up to that game, they were not playing very well. And then if you remember that game, they took the first period off. I mean, they completely stunk. Like, this wasn't like last night where it was 2 teams coming off a holiday break and it was sloppy hockey because they hadn't practiced or played in a handful of days. The Penguins went into Tampa and just slept walk through a period. And prior to that, they weren't playing good hockey. Last night, a little bit sloppy to start the first period. Both teams were. Once they find their footing, the Penguins take off and just completely dominate the Islanders. But in other than the Senators game, the lead up to this, the Penguins have been pretty darn good. If not pretty darn good, they have been competitive to better than we've seen for the last month or so. So I do think legitimately this is a chance for this team to start building, because they're playing better hockey as of the last 2-3 weeks than they were the last time we had this conversation. Like, it was fun and cool that they made a nice comeback against the Lightning and Tristan Jarry scores a goal, but those were empty calories. It was like we were so caught up in that we just completely missed some warning signs about how much that team was struggling and how many problems there were under the hood. Right now, though, this looks like a team that is starting to figure it out.
And even though we're almost at January 1, where it is sometimes too late for teams, with how the Metropolitan Division is right now, the Penguins are only 5 points out of second. You win that game against the Islanders on Sunday, and if the Islanders lose to the Capitals in regulation on Friday, all of a sudden, you're only 3 points behind that team, and you still play that team 2 more times this season. The Penguins have plenty of opportunities left to make a move in this division. They just have to, again, keep up this strong play. The 5-on-5 numbers are starting to rebound at least a little bit. They're getting good goaltending. The top 2 defensemen are playing very well. You saw some depth scoring in this one against the Islanders. It would be nice if that were to keep up. And also, we saw in that Islander game, the second line finally had a good game for the first time in a couple of weeks. I thought Evgeni Malkin was all over the ice. I thought that was his best game in honestly 2 to 3 weeks, to be honest. I thought he was puck hunting, which I think when he is on his game, he is out there just hounding for the puck. And I also loved how he parked his butt right in the front of the net to take that feed from Kris Letang and just put that past Ilya Sorokin. He was fantastic in this one as well. But you're starting to see some things coming together here. But we'll keep saying it until it changes, folks. Let's see how the power play eventually does. It needs to still turn around. I'll only discuss it a little bit on this one, Pat, just because of everything that happened. And by the way, congratulations to Evgeni Malkin. Second most goals.
That's right. We forgot that part in the second.
By a Russian player, past Sergei Fedorov on Wednesday night. Congratulations to Gino. I know he's not going to pass Alex Ovechkin. No one's going to pass Ovi. But to be second all time, considering how many great Russian players have played in the league, that is fantastic. But again, agree with what you're saying. We're in crunch time, to say the least here.
Well, and here's the thing. You brought up who they're going to play here in the next week or so, right? Like, they got the Blues and Islanders this weekend, two middling teams that they are definitely capable of beating. But then you go into January, and the opponents coming up in January, there's not a lot of great teams there. Capitals, extremely beatable. Bruins, okay, they're again one of the best teams in hockey. I'm so sick of saying that, but that's the fact of the matter. But then you have Sabres, Flyers. Okay, then the Canucks, who are pretty, I think we're starting to realize they're just good. Carolina, a team you've shown you can beat. Seattle, not that great. Vegas, okay, they're a wagon. Arizona, definitely beatable. Florida, okay, another great team. And then the Habs before the All-Star break. That is a serious opportunity to put together. And they have one back-to-back.
You can bank some points with that schedule. There are teams on there that are beatable. There are some very good teams that we'll have to face. Obviously, Boston, Washington's been good this year. Vancouver, they've already lost to Florida down in Sunrise. But as you said, there's really only one back-to-back for that month of January. And we're looking pretty far ahead here, people. We totally understand this. But there are also still quite a few winnable games during that month where the Penguins can really put themselves in a good position heading into February to potentially even be in a playoff spot heading into that month, where Kyle Dubas, I think, will have a much better feel of whether he wants to maybe sell off some assets at the deadline, or in a better world, of course, whether he wants to buy, maybe get a forward, or figure out what to do with the bottom pairing, because I think there's still some questions there as well.
Agreed. Before we wrap up this edition of the Locked On Penguins podcast, I know Hunter has two more shout outs he'd like to give. I'm very curious to see what they are, because I did not hear about this in prep. So what do you got?
So just two more shout outs for players' performances from this game. Number one, Marcus Pettersson, 4 assists in this one. He is playing at an extremely high level right now. And I know when you think of the Pittsburgh Penguins, you think of all the star talent on this team. But if you're not tuning in to also watch Marcus Pettersson do his thing every night, you're not doing it right, my friends. He is playing at an elite level right now in all three zones. We know how good he is defensively, but he has taken some serious strides offensively this season, and it's been a joy to watch. I think he's turned himself into one of the most underrated defensemen in the entire NHL. Another great performance from him. And then one more shout out to end the show, Drew O'Connor. That's two really strong performances in a row from him. I thought he was forechecking like crazy in that game against the Islanders. He probably should have had a shorthanded goal. It was a really nice save by Ilya Sorokin before the Penguins kicked things off in the second period. It was just a really strong performance overall from O'Connor, and he deserved that promotion after what he did in that game against Ottawa. I felt like before these last two games, he was kind of in a rut those last 2 to 3 weeks, but these last two games, he's been coming out of it, really starting to show why I was high on him after the really strong preseason that he had. So those are the final two shout-outs that I wanted to have to end the show.
Yeah, Marcus Pettersson is becoming one of the better all-around defensemen in the National Hockey League. I really don't know what else you can say about him. And Drew O'Connor, we said Big Z scored last night, and we talked about the impact of the guys coming up from Wilkes-Barre, and he's starting to look like what we wanted him to be. He's starting to make the impact he needs to make. But that is going to do it for us on this edition of the Locked On Penguins podcast. We will be back tomorrow to preview the back-to-back weekend coming up here against the Blues and again against the Islanders, but that will be tomorrow's episode. Thank you so much for always tuning in and making us your first listen/watch of the day. For Hunter Hodies, I am Patrick Damp, and we will return tomorrow.